his upper half had been stripped naked, but that was already horrifying enough. Regardless of everything else, Shen Qingqiu was still a peak lord. This appearance with his upper half stark naked, his lower half wearing only a pair of pants and white shoes, and his forelimbs bound tightly with a thin rope as he lay sprawled on the floor. What was this? He looked exactly like a tender, pretty boy caught in a bed during an illicit act. No wonder the system had deducted 50 points straight off the bat. It was deserved. Even taking him to 0 would have served him right. Shen Qingqiu's face went from red to white and back. He wanted to dig a hole in the ground with his sword and bury himself for a while, but his sword had disappeared without a trace. Of course, Luo Binghe looked both worried and a little embarrassed. He definitely assumed that having seen Shen Qingqiu in such a sorry state, he would inevitably suffer more vicious retaliation once they got back.
师尊, you finally woke up,
Ning Ying sobbed.
Ying is so scared.
Scared? If you're scared, then don't go running off whenever you feel like it, young lady. Shen Qingqiu gave up. Momentarily, an unsettling chuckle came from behind him. A tall, dark silhouette emerged from the pitch blackness.
The great Changqiu Mountain, the great peak lord of Jingjing Peak. This is all you amount to. If the so-called greatest sect in the world is full of your sort, the day the demon race conquers the human realm is just around the corner.
This was followed by another bout of crazed laughter. The speaker's head and face were covered with a black veil, and their voice was hoarse and unpleasant, as if their throat had been ruined by opium smoke. Shen Qingqiu squinted. The Skinner demon?
That's right, that's me, I'm the Skinner demon. How wonderful that the illustrious Xiuya sword has fallen into my hands today. Shen Qingqiu, Shen Qingqiu. If you think until your wrist give out, you won't be able to guess my identity.
Why wouldn't I be able to guess? Asked Shen Qingqiu. The Skinner demon said nothing. You are Dier, aren't you? The Skinner demon said nothing again as they lifted their veil. Then she snapped in irritation.
Impossible! How did you guess?
Shen Qingqiu was speechless. Did she think he was blind? That he couldn't tell from her figure? Men loved to look at bodies first before the face, okay? With that curvy bust and bottom, plus that tiny waist in between, she could only be a woman. Also, the room's furnishings smelled rich, and you couldn't find that just anywhere. Of course, he knew that they'd be transported back to Chen Manor, and while Chen Manor had many women in residence, he'd only seen a couple and only been introduced to Dier. So, if he had to guess, of course, he could only guess Dier. He didn't know anyone else's names. How could he even guess them? But who knew you'd lose your cool so quickly without denying it even a little and jump right to lifting your veil? Could he say this? Could he? Listen, how could he say this out loud? He could only swallow it all down. Dier, or to be clear, the Skinner demon, quickly adjusted her posture and donned the face of old Master Chen's beloved concubine, thusly recovering that infinitely tender, stunning, and delighted smile.
Not bad, it was indeed me. But Shen Qingqiu, even if you guessed until your wits gave out, you couldn't possibly imagine why a weak and delicate woman like me could be the culprit, right?
Shen Qingqiu straightened, struggling to assume a posture that was more natural, less rule-violating. Bosses traditionally received time to monologue. How could he not offer this courtesy? Dier didn't need his encouragement and continued unprompted.
The Skinner demon comes and goes without a trace, not because I can fly through the skies or disappear into the earth, but rather because every time I finish killing a person, I change into their skin. By wearing these women's skins and imitating their behavior, I can blend into the crowd with none the wiser and search for my next target.
That's not right, said Shen Qingqiu. Dier's expression darkened.
What's not right?
Suppose every time you killed a person and you changed skins. For instance, when you killed Dier and wore her skin, you became Dier. But Dier's skinned corpse would still be here. Wouldn't someone find it strange that there are two Diers? Of course, if he thought about it for a moment, he understood. It wasn't like this world had DNA identification. After skinning someone, all you had left was a messy lump of bloody flesh. Pretty difficult to tell exactly who it had been.
Looks like you figured that out too,
said Diera.
Not bad. I used the current woman's corpse to substitute for the last woman's. For example, when I killed Diera, I was wearing Xiang'er's skin, so everyone at the time thought Xiang'er was still alive. After I donned Diera's skin, I disguised Diera's corpse to look like Xiang'er's before it was found.
This villain's professional integrity was really impressive. Not only had she exposed her inner thoughts and feelings, she'd also explained her methods and line of criminal reasoning in detail. Offering examples, providing personal experiences, Diera was more diligently thorough than a college entrance exam cram school teacher. Luo Binghe had been silently listening the entire time, his eyes glittering with a trace of anger. His juvenile sense of justice had been stirred by this perverse demon's cruel actions. Meanwhile, Ning Yingying's head was spinning from all the Xiangs and Dies. She couldn't understand it at all. She didn't even dare interrupt. Shen Qingqiu asked, "After a certain amount of time, you always change skins. Is this all on a whim or do you have to?" Diera sneered.
You think I'll tell you?
"You've already told me plenty, all right, sis. Or is it bro? What's one more?" Diera walked around where Ning Yingying and Luo Binghe were bound together. Luo Binghe remained calm, but Ning Yingying screamed, "Demon, don't come near, Shizun, save me!" Diera chuckled.
Your master have been bound with my immortal binding cable. Spiritual energy can no longer flow anywhere in his body. He can't hope to protect himself. How could he save you?
Ah, that explained it. Shen Qingqiu had been secretly attempting to gather his spiritual power, but it seemed to be obstructed. It didn't feel nearly as plentiful as it usually did. Diera had re-engaged monologue mode.
Damn, if it weren't for my damaged martial aspect, I wouldn't need to constantly change skins and absorb human chi. You're a brat, but your skin is luscious and tender, and you're a disciple from a prestigious sect. I expect I'll be able to use you for a good long while. After I suck your skin dry, it'll be your master's turn. That way I'll make sure that the Shoya sword didn't live his life in vain.
Luo Binghe stared, silent. Shen Qingqiu stared, also silent. What was that she'd say? You think I'd tell you, right? Not only have you told me, you also seem to have made the astonishing decision to reveal your plan. The professional standards of this world villains are beyond salvation. So, Shen Qingqiu said in his mind as he shamelessly called out to the system, if I make a mistake during a quest and I end up dead, will I get a chance to reload and try again? Only the protagonist is granted the privilege of plot armor, said the system. Great. Good thing this villain had the illustrious quality of must answer every question. If Shen Qingqiu wanted to stall for time, he needed only to toss another question at Diera. Haven't you only targeted young beautiful girls? He asked.
I never said I only pick young, beautiful women. As long as they're good-looking and their skin is fine and smooth, I'll take anyone. It's just that most of the time, a man's skin isn't as good as a woman's skins, and the skins of elderly is never as good as that of the youthful. As expected, Diera chatted on and on. Then suddenly her eyes flashed green with envy and her expression grew yearning as she began to run her hands, painted with scarlet nail dye, over Shen Qingqiu's upper body. However, cultivators really are different. Even though you're a man, your skin is so glossy and smooth. It's been so long since I had my male skin. As he was felt up by those searching hands, Shen Qingqiu broke out in goosebumps, though he strove to give off the air of spotless and untouchable. Part of him was disgusted, but another part was sympathetic. Honestly, this demon was quite pitiful. It sounded like Diera had originally been a man, but they had to keep using the skins of women due to their condition. After such a long time, of course that would make you a little twisted. In any case,
Right in this moment, the demon was wearing the infinitely lovely face of a concubine. Being felt up all over by those lovely hands, Shen Qingqiu inevitably became embarrassed, and he involuntarily shrank back a little. This vision, that moment, struck Luo Binghe to his core. Until now, he'd only ever seen Shen Qingqiu's aloof and remote attitude, his derisive expression. But here and now, a faint, uncontrollable red flush formed on that face, and the way those eyes darted away. Also, Shen Qingqiu's upper body was completely bare, but for the thin yet unbreakable immortal binding cable and the red marks it left, and for Shen Qingqiu's long disheveled jet black hair, neither of which concealed anything. Luo Binghe's chest was burning with a convoluted emotion that was most impossible to describe. If you had let Shen Qingqiu think up of an analogy for this emotion, he would have said it was like watching a beautiful romance movie, only to discover at the end that the protagonist was that English teacher who'd always pick on you to answer questions, and who, if you failed to answer, would give you a palm 300 slashes. In short, it both shattered Luo Binghe's worldview and did him great injury. Shen Qingqiu suddenly grinned.
"Why are you smiling?"
DR asked wearily. "I'm amused at you and your poor judgment," said Shen Qingqiu, slow and deliberate. Pearls before swines, as they say. There are 3 options here, yet out of them you keep overlooking the most suitable vessel. At these words, Luo Binghe's face went pale. He could never have imagined he'd be randomly thrown to the wolves. However, Shen Qingqiu wasn't speaking thoughtlessly. Remember who Luo Binghe was. In truth, he was descended from a line of ancient heavenly demons. Legend had it that these denizens of the heavens had fallen to depravity and become demons, so they were called heavenly demons for short. As the future princes of demonkind, their bloodline was first class. If an ordinary demon got their hands on such a body, forget to repair a damaged martial aspect, would there be anything they couldn't do? Diera looked Luo Binghe up and down. The latter strove to appear calm, but inside he was panicking and didn't know what to do. Even though he thought until his wits gave out, he couldn't figure out why he had suddenly become the star of the standoff.
"If you want to trick me, you'd need a better lie,"
said Diera.
"This brat's appearance and aptitude may be exemplary, and his skin fresh and tender, but how can he compare to you? You've reached the stage of mid-core formation."
"With your level of insight, it's no wonder your martial training was unsuccessful," said Shen Qingqiu, smiling. "Think about it for a moment. What kind of person am I, Shen Qingqiu? If this child possessed excellent aptitude and a fine appearance but nothing else, why would I accept him as my disciple? If I only wanted a disciple with excellent aptitude, could I not have my pick of the talents who fight to enter Chanqiu Mountain Sect every year? Though naturally, my thought process cannot be explained to outsiders." DR wavered. Excellent! This villain's IQ was truly ridiculously low. They were so easy to trick that even though Shen Qingqiu had conjured a hasty explanation riddled with logical holes, they actually seemed to half believe it. Shen Qingqiu struck while the iron was hot. "If you're suspicious, there's an easy test. Let me share a method by which you can verify my words. Go over there and strike him on the crown of his head. Then you'll know whether I'm lying." Luo Binghe's face turned a ghastly white. Though he was mature for his age, he was still a child. Even most grown men couldn't stoically face their deaths, let alone a boy who was only 14 years old. Shen Qingqiu tried very hard not to look at him, and he desperately apologized in his heart over and over again. "Binghe, you're a man of virtue. Please magnanimously forgive my smack-talking and backstabbing just this once, okay? I'll never do it again. I'll definitely make it up to you in the future."
Shizun, you can't be serious!"
Ning Ying was scared witless. Shen Qingqiu was on tenterhooks. It didn't even occur to him to comfort her. He only smiled at Diera. "You don't know if I'm telling the truth now, but you'll know as soon as you try. Why hesitate? It's only a single strike against an insignificant boy. Even if I were lying to you, You aren't risking anything, are you? Or are you worried that I'm telling the truth, so you dare not hit him?" In the eyes of anyone who didn't know the truth, these were the words of a man eagerly pushing Luo Binghe to his death. Luo Binghe stared in disbelief. He wondered bleakly if Shen Qingqiu's hatred for him had truly become so great. But if that were the case, why had his master been just a little nicer to him on their trip to the city? Luo Binghe couldn't help but start struggling with all his might. The ropes restraining his body became tighter and tighter, biting painfully into Ning Yingying, but she didn't dare to even breathe loudly and just quietly sobbed. Shen Qingqiu's words and tone were powerfully persuasive. Deer thought for a moment and decided at last that, true enough, they had already killed so many people. How could they be afraid to kill one more? They snorted.
"I want to see exactly what sort of foolish game you're playing."
As they said this, they strode towards Luo Binghe and brought their palm down.